Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Pivot Today with Mohamed Kharwa as an active member of the South African Muslim Network as my guest. Mohamed has been with SAMNET with Dr. Faisal Sooliman since its inception around 18 years ago, and they have done a wide range of activism and research, leadership and networking with the Muslim community and wider civil society. SAMNET focuses on many socio-political issues to raise awareness and develop talented programs and proposals to tackle issues such as wide as electoral participation, prejudice like Islamophobia, racism and xenophobia, human rights, the environment, gender-based violence, education, legislation, policy and media engagement, monitoring and accountability. SAMNET considers issues that are local and global, whether it be Palestine, India, Kashmir, Sudan, even the US and the EU. And often they focus on protecting the rights of Muslims and all South African citizens. For us as a South African Muslim community, this is very important, especially with regards professionals, Muslim professionals, who have much to give, much to offer, but somehow don't know where to divert their talents, how to contribute to uplifting the Muslim community in South Africa, and how to actively engage when we face significant challenges. If you look at what is happening in South Africa with the Zionist Federation, with the Jewish Board of Deputies and their attacks on many South African Muslim professionals, with threats on individuals who are speaking out in trying to silence our voices, now is the time more than ever before that we need to come together and harness our potential, raise our voices through the channels that have been established, and work together. Put aside those differences. Let's become stronger. Let's become a formidable presence in South Africa, and let's work to tackle the issues that are very often, waylaid or put to the side simply because we don't know how to go about that. So with that, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum to Mohamed, and thank you very much for making this time for me today.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for the opportunity for having me here today.
So very briefly, Mohamed, for people who don't know, what is SAMNET and why was it important to establish it?
So SAMNET was formed, or actively took its role up around 18 years ago. It was formed to actually start addressing issues outside of what are the issues of common interest that we do have that are very normally dealt with by our ulama bodies and our support and social organizations, to start dealing with how do we actually look at some of the root issues, how do we actually start looking at impacting on society as a whole, obviously from the perspective of the Muslim community, our values, our objectives, our goals, and also in terms of what is good and right for humanity. So from that perspective, it was formed with the intention that we would drive issues outside of any of the fixed stuff, to focus on issues of lobbying, networking, and impacting on society in a positive way.
So now, in terms of lobbying, we just went through an elections. Did SAMNET play an important role in getting together the community, in discussing how it is that we should go forward with our votes, as much as the Muslims in the UK did, getting together that Muslim vote, harnessing it? And do you find that there are professionals who are coming to the party, offering their skills, giving of their time, and working together with SAMNET to say, come on, we can do better for Muslims in South Africa? At the same time, that vision is not only about Muslims in South Africa, but it is about South Africa as a whole, because we are part of the South African Muslim community.
We're part of the global community as well. And I think, if anything, the ICJ case has proven that as Muslims in South Africa, we actually have a role, not just and a responsibility, not just from a perspective of our own communities or our own country. We've actually got a global responsibility, and we must not underestimate the impact of the people within the community, the impact of what we have done to build South Africa, and the voice that we have, and how that has actually contributed to the country. So from the perspective of SAMNET, it's been a long road. I mean, when we started off, there are a lot of people who like the idea and who say, we need to lobby, but we don't always get the support. And I think what we have been able to achieve over the years, and as I said, it's a long road, is we've seen the dial move, we've seen the awareness range, we've seen participation change. And if we take the last election, yes, some of the things that we have been doing for many years, where we've been raising, the issue of Muslim participation in elections. We need more Muslims to register to vote than to actually vote, to be more aware of what they are voting for, who they are voting for, and how they make that choice, to be able to have our leaders in the community step up and discuss the issue around elections, to make it an important part of our responsibility as Muslims in South Africa, and to be able to start developing people in the space of politics, media, etc. We've seen the impact, alhamdulillah, of, for example, someone like Kanita Hunter, who has become a leading voice and an expert in the field of South African politics and global politics as well. And that's the result of efforts to try and encourage our youth to start taking up careers in journalism. We've run a journalism and a political science bursary program for over a decade. It is very hard to find people to take up those careers. It is very hard to get people to focus on that as a career choice and to be able to put money aside specifically for that. We only created the bursary scheme on the basis that we identified a gap for us within the Muslim community. We've got an extensive, and alhamdulillah, we are very, very fortunate that we've got people to be able to contribute to financial programs and bursaries, but then we don't always allocate those resources strategically. And that was part of the bursary program. That was part of our impact on politics. We went through the process over the years, and alhamdulillah, at this last election, and because it was, in many ways, we feel very, very pertinent and very close to the Muslim community in terms of impact and what was happening around the world and locally, it became a priority. But that should be our norm. We need to actually understand that we have a great privilege in South Africa as Muslims, that Muslims in many other parts of the world are not able to exercise, even in places where they are in much larger numbers. But then that privilege comes with a responsibility. So as SAMNET, we've undertaken programs to increase voter registration, voter awareness, voter participation. And alhamdulillah, it's been, as I said, a journey, but we are starting to see the impact of that within the Muslim community and within the South African population as well.
So, Mohamed, you raise very important issues here, and this is phenomenal work that you're doing. But the bottom line is that the future of this country lies in the hands of the youth. And the South African Muslim youth, I think, have become too complacent, much like the generation post 1994, because they haven't been involved in the struggles for this country. The South African Muslim youth, do we have the potential to reach them? How do we reach them? And there is a significant amount of them who are Muslim professionals today. Are they coming to your program? Are they recognizing SAMNET? Are they saying, what is it that we as the young Muslims of South Africa can do or contribute to this country? This is our home. This is where we are. This is where we belong. And we want to make it a better place.
We do struggle in terms of actual time given. We don't do things which are generally things which are going to be exciting in the context of you can see a product in a space of a couple of weeks. And sometimes I think we do struggle as the Muslim community in South Africa, where we want to see tangible results immediately. And that's why, as exceptional as we have been in terms of being able to provide social support, whether it is in terms of disasters, whether it is in terms of communities, education, things of those sort, building schools and supporting infrastructure. What we need to get people to understand is that those are very often dealing with the consequences of decisions made. And what we do need to start looking at is the root causes. Now, there are, as much as we look at youth and we say that our youth are maybe sometimes, disenchanted, or distracted, or maybe even apathetic in some ways to some of the issues, I don't think that that's actually entirely true. I think in part there are a lot of youth who are wanting to do things, who don't have the channels to be able to drive that energy sometimes, and often they don't have the experience. But sometimes we also have a situation where there are people who are in leadership positions who are maybe not giving them the freedom to do what they want to do. Not, we seem to have often people who are trying to, in well-intentioned, but sometimes with the youth, they kind of want to put barriers around them and say, don't try new things. Now, the rate of change in the world has gone, up exponentially in the last 100 years. Things move a lot faster. And we, as some of the leaders, need to start making space for the youth to be heard, for them to take charge, and sometimes step aside a little bit and say, okay, maybe, we need to let them make a few mistakes. The generations that have come before us, from 100 years ago and through the apartheid period as well, those generations have actually set foundations for us. And we are guilty of not building on those because we maybe became a little bit complacent, or we lived off that values and the benefits that they had. And post-apartheid, whatever it may have been, we have to actually recognize that we've got to now fix that, and the world has moved on. So when we speak to the youth and we say, the youth are, not stepping forward, maybe it's time for us to create the spaces, and we've worked hard to do that. We have got, a lot of young people who are wanting to be, involved. Yes, they do need to know. From SAMNET perspective, we're always open to that. We have to also understand that, we've got to be able to coach people, guide people, give them understanding, and learn from their own experiences as well. From the professionals' perspective, we do have a problem, and we have to recognize it, that unfortunately, it's a consequence of the world we live in, the lifestyles that we are choosing, etc. People are not always able to, or choose to, maybe is a better choice of words, give their time and their skills as freely as they are willing to give their money. And what we do have to recognize is that when they are giving their funds, they very often are looking at what is it that we can have, quick results with, and not looking at what are the issues of root cause that we want to focus on. So if I have to pick an example, we very often deal with issues that might be related to, poverty, or relate to people and families who are in distress. And we want to be able to support them, and we want to be able to make sure that people have food, that people have a shelter. But let's go to the root cause. If we have to start looking at what those root causes are, we've got to go back and we've got to say, what's happening in our education space? Are we looking at the policy of education? Not just putting up another classroom, but let's ask ourselves, why is it that we don't have enough? Why is it that our government, with all of the funds that we are spending, we are not producing graduates in volumes that we need to, and at the same time dealing with issues maybe with regards to policy and availability?
Okay, so we have to go to a break, but when we come back, these are two issues that I do want to take up with you in the second segment. The one is on education, and the one specifically is where you talk about alcohol and the alcohol bill. But we'll discuss this when we come back. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the second segment with my very special guest, Mohamed Kharwa from SAMNET. And before we went on to the break, Mohamed was speaking about very many pertinent issues, significantly with regards to education. And education affects us. We have, very many of us have children in schools, grandchildren, and we have to recognize that there are changes coming into the schools, into the curricula, that will have a detrimental effect on their psyche as they grow. So Mohamed, I want to raise these two issues with you, the one on education and the one on alcohol, which you have been campaigning. For me, I have found it significantly, rather curious that for very often so much energy has been invested into smoking, yet if you look at the social cost of alcohol, it is far more significant than the social cost of smoking. Yet there has been a lot of campaigning around banning cigarettes, but not a focus on the issue of alcohol. And I find also that Muslim communities and communities who have been pushed into these slums, these geopolitical spaces of violence that were created by apartheid. So whether we were in Indian community in Lenasia or you're in Overport, etc., and if you're a black community in Kailicha or Soweto, we do not protest these billboards that are put up that advertise alcohol, etc., but you will never find an alcohol billboard in a white suburb. So there's a lot that needs to go on in terms of education with regards to that and the actual curricula that's coming into the schools.
If you don't mind, I'm going to actually start with the second one, which is with regards to the issue on the alcohol. And related to that is actually an issue on gambling, the gambling addiction as well. So we need to look at root causes, and we need to actually start addressing things at the root level rather than very often at the impact level. So while we might have, protests, and we may take the issue of women who are affected by gender-based violence, or even, women who are killed, we need to also start focusing on what does the research tell us. And that's something else we are trying to drive, especially within our Muslim community and organizations. And what are we actually looking at in terms of the evidence, and how do we actually address things from that perspective? So from the perspective of the information and the research, one of the factors that we would like to address in South Africa is that women are killed, 60% of them are killed by their intimate partners. Now, when we look at that factor and we start taking into account the fact that gender-based violence has got an issue where more than half of it, I think it's also around 60%, happens within the home, we now need to look at what are the issues in the home that are generating and causing the problems of gender-based violence. When we look at gender-based violence in the home, the research has showed us, and we've all been, very, very acutely aware of this during lockdown, that once alcohol was kind of stopped, gender-based violence dropped, because alcohol abuse is a major factor in violence and abuse within the home, not just affecting our women, but our children as well. So if we want to actually change the issue of, at multiple levels, the killing of women, the violence that women and children experience in the home, then we've got to look at alcohol. And as I mentioned, related to that is now the issue of gambling addiction and gambling as well. If families are being affected by alcoholism, then we must expect that there's going to be gender-based violence. So we now need to actually try and say, how do we deal with the alcohol problem? And there are many levels to this. One of the issues that we have been trying to address is the importance for us to start focusing on and getting attention on alcohol and gambling advertising. Also, the access and the availability of alcohol, the issue around the times and trading hours of alcohol, and then the access and availability of gambling on different platforms. So taking alcohol, there's research again in South Africa, and there have been trials conducted in the Western Cape that changes to things like the trading hours impacts on the abuse of alcohol and what that has in terms of society as well. It's not just about the gender-based violence, because if we start addressing, I use this example often, if you have to watch sport with a young child, we want to be able to share that love and passion for sport with our children. But what happens at halftime? Whether it's rugby, whether it is soccer, whether it is any other sport, there are just two things that are advertised almost exclusively, and that is alcohol and gambling. Now, that is the message that we are putting out there, that sport and the health and the goodness of sport is associated with alcohol and gambling. Good times are associated with alcohol and gambling. And we need to break that. We need to actually go out there and change the advertising rules. As you mentioned, we have rules around smoking. We know that the negative and the harmful effects of smoking. And as one of my colleagues many years ago said, I've never seen a family broken up by a person who has a smoking addiction, but I have seen families broken up by people who have alcohol problems. Then maybe we need to apply similar rules to alcohol as we do to smoking. Whether it is advertising in the public spaces, whether it is advertising in the, on TV, in the media, or the actual branding, we need to actually address this as a society. South Africa has one of the highest alcohol consumption rates in the world. And these also have got their roots in, the apartheid era, in colonialism. I mean, very few people, in maybe modern South Africa realize what the DOP system was, where people were paid in alcohol on farms. And basically, the consequences of those things have been studied, whether it is fetal alcohol syndrome. And then from there, we can then take exactly the same issues and apply them to our road accidents, apply them to issues around accidents and people who are unable to come to work, so the economic impacts. And we've got to recognize that there is a massive lobby of people within the alcohol industry. And in South Africa, we have some of the largest companies are alcohol companies who are going to defend what is their income, irrespective of what the social consequences are. So we need to be able to go out there and address issues of legislation at a national level. We've got to understand that a lot of alcohol legislation happens at the provincial level, and then at the local level with bylaws and enforcement of bylaws, whether it is rules around whether or not we get licensing of places selling alcohol or advertising in our communities, the billboards and the permission for that. We need to start strengthening things at that level if we want to see the impacts. And there's tons of examples around the world. Binge drinking is a massive problem in the UK. Iceland has had an exceptional impact on their problems with youth drinking and alcohol addiction by taking a program that took over 20 years to actually yield results. But somebody's got to start somewhere, and we've got to start having those conversations. Now, coming into and linking back to the issue around education, we've been very vociferous around the issue of the Bella Bill. And a lot of what we've been able to do is to try and raise awareness within the Muslim community, to be able to drive and activate people, to be able to build connections. There's an organization called Freedom of Religion South Africa that we networked with, and then we brought our ulama organizations to work with, because they, outside of the Muslim community, have exactly the same concerns that we do. There are organizations like the DG Murray Trust, which actually addresses the issue of alcohol harm reduction, as they call it. So this isn't an exclusively Muslim issue. This is a broader South African issue. It's a social issue. And in many ways, it's an international issue as well. So when we come to education, we talk about the Bella Bill, and we've been, vociferous, and we've been encouraging people to participate and to comment. And then in parallel with that, we've actually also raised the issue that the Bella Bill includes an additional provision. So up until the current legislation, schools were alcohol-free zones. The current Bella Bill has now introduced a provision which allows schools to have alcohol on the premises. Now, we think that that is very, very counterproductive. It sends the wrong message. And whatever the arguments for, which have been as broad as, when we have events for adults or for parents, or we want to do fundraising, we must allow alcohol on the premises. We think that that's just completely nonsensical, because you cannot create an environment where we normalize alcohol at a child level and in education space and for our youth to the point where that's the assumption for them. And we've got to recognize that that is a problem in our communities and our societies. At a local community level, we've got to address the issue of shebeens. Licensing of shebeens and permission for shebeens is completely different to licensing in suburban areas. Why is that? Why is it that this is permitted in some areas and not in others? Where are the shebeens located? Who are the people who make the money from the shebeens? With regards to the licensing of shebeens, we've got to address the fact that shebeens are relatively less regulated than places which sell alcohol in our suburbs. And what does that have as an impact to the socioeconomic level, the most vulnerable in our communities? And where are these shebeens located? A lot of them are located within walking distance of our schools. So if we want to address the root causes of societal issues, we need more activism. We need people to get involved. We need people to step up and, join the school governing bodies, object when you are on the school governing bodies with regards to licensing. We need to actually then step up and start dealing with legislative issues. And for that, what we do need is we need more people to be more active in focused areas. We are happy to be able to guide people. We always are welcoming people who want to be able to give their time. We do need funds, because very often we need to take things up legally, whether we are challenging issues on the Broadcasting Complaints Commission or the Media Ombudsman, when the media starts stereotyping and dealing with issues like affording Islamophobic kind of messaging. We want to be able to get more people involved, whether they are lawyers and doctors. We've driven on issues around blood donation. We would like to actually see more of our youth involved and our ulama guiding on issues of the environment as well. So SAMNET is not just covering the one area. We want to cover a lot more. But these are just some of the examples that we feel need to be addressed urgently.
Okay, so because we're out of time now, very quickly, if somebody was watching the show and they want to contact SAMNET and they want to say, look, we want to give our time, this is what we can offer, this is our issues, etc., or we need guidance on this, who do they contact and how do they reach you?
The easiest way for them to contact us is to actually reach us through the website. So it's samnet.co.za. If we start off, and that's a Google search. Once you're on there, the email address is there. Send us a WhatsApp on our WhatsApp number. We will be able to then engage with you and give us some details of what your passion is.
Okay, so Mohamed, I'm going to stop you there with the end of the website because we're out of time. And I'm going to conclude now. So can I conclude? Okay, so Mohamed, thank you very much for sharing that information with us and for raising, these issues with the Muslim community so that we recognize what it is that we need to do. Hopefully, we will get more participation and people, especially the young professionals, will recognize that they have a responsibility in the way in which they shape the South African community. Fi amanillah wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.